Wow. So I'm looking at all of these. If you can't see sitting down here, but the upper deck is filled with cadets, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and welcome to the wonderful Marshall Hall, home of VMI Center for Leadership and Ethics. I am Thomas Brashear from the great VMI class of 1995 and the Chief Operating Officer of the VMI Alumni Association. Today we are privileged to welcome 4 pioneers back to the Institute: Adam Randolph, Phil Wilkerson, Harry Gore, and Dick Valentine, all from the great class of 1972. They, along with the late Larry Foster, as evidenced by the chair to Dick's left, were the first African-American cadets of VMI, matriculating in the late summer of 1968. We are here today to recognize this seminal moment in VMI's history. After graduation, these fine men went on to successful careers, both in the military and in the business world. Interestingly enough, 2 of them ended up as pilots. 1 fixed wing, 1 rotary wing. 3 of them grew up in Hampton, 2 of which went to high school together. The 4th here, this is up the road a little bit in Newport News. So, over the last several weeks, I have had the great honor and pleasure to get to know Phil, Adam, Harry, and Dick very well. And I now consider all 4 of them friends, and I've enjoyed those visits immensely. Let me tell you something, though. They can each tell a good story. and I cannot wait to hear more. Another interesting point, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time in 49 years that these 4 alumni have been together at the same time. Today, with the invaluable help of Colonel Keith Gibson, Director of VMI's Museum System, they will delve a bit deeper into their stories and their experiences as cadets. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Keith Gibson.
This is inspiring in its own. The fact that these gentlemen are back, the fact that you are here, it suggests that there's interest in this thing which we undertake this morning. I can almost divide this room into 2 sections. Those that remember 1969 and 1968, and those that weren't even born at that time. But for the benefit of you all, whether or not you were here on the planet or not, I think we need to take a moment and remember, reflect on, and in some instances, not just remember, but to inform you of what it was like in America in 1968. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this event, celebrating the 50th anniversary of racial integration, sometimes referred to as desegregation, but I want to make a distinction there. I'll get back to that in a few moments. Racial integration at VMI. I think we qualify for the definition of true integration. Before we hear from the men who made this event possible then and today, that is to say, these gentlemen, I want to set the time for you. 1968. It has been referred to, I think quite accurately, as the hinge point of history for the 20th century America. One of the most tumultuous periods in our American story. A year of incredible triumph. A year of almost unbelievable tragedy. It was an age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. Those aren't my words. You might remember them, those of you English majors, the beginning sentences from Charles Dickens' novel, The Tale of Two Cities. The Tale of Two Cities. And it was so true for America at midpoint in the 1960s. Social and political trends building for years finally reached a critical point in 1968. As the war in Vietnam escalated, so too did opposition around the nation. But in fact, around the world, students and populations in foreign countries taking interest in that effort. And by the way, there will be a panel discussion here this afternoon on that very topic and the role of the class of '69 in particular in that. And let me pause here for a moment and thank you to the class of '69 for making this type of activity a part of your anniversary events to get back together. It's to be applauded and hopefully emulated by the classes behind you. But the world was taking note of what was happening in the fabric of America. Severe economic problems, an increasingly impatient civil rights movement emphasized this social tension. The rise of feminism, campus revolts against college administrators at home, a home front war over cultural norms, value issues became very important on campuses and in dining room tables. All were changing the country forever. It was a perfect storm. Near the end of January, the North Vietnamese launched the Tet Offensive, a coordinated attack of at least 85,000 Viet Cong against 36 hand-picked Vietnamese cities. U.S. forces were shocked to be suddenly fighting communist troops, not out in the DMZ, but right there in Saigon, just blocks away from the American embassy. Launched during a time in the past that the North and South previously agreed to a New Year's truce, the Tet Offensive stimulated a strong anti-war response back home. And then the trusted voice of CBS News, Walter Cronkite, questioned U.S. resolve to win the war. U.S. forces reversed the initial military setback of Tet, of course, but the political damage had been done. On the third day of April, nonviolent civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. made one of his many eloquent and visionary speeches at the Mason Temple Church of God in Memphis. He was there to join strikers, mainly African-American strikers, in the city of Memphis workers. Near the end of his speech, King paused as he looked out on those gathered there that evening. And then he declared, "Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will." And he allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. It's known today as his going to the mountain speech. The following day, less than 24 hours later, April the 4th, a shot rang out in Memphis. It ended the life of Dr. King. The nation erupted in violence, fueled by shock and grief and pain and frustration. Neighborhoods in sight of the U.S. Capitol building, young men and women of the Corps, the smoke and flames rising so that congressmen could see what was happening to the nation just blocks away, consumed by flame. 2 months later, Democratic presidential candidate Robert Kennedy was assassinated following a campaign speech. How could this be? What was happening to the country? In a three-way race between independent white segregationist George Wallace of Alabama, Democratic nominee and current Vice President Hubert Humphrey, and Republican former Vice President Richard Nixon, Nixon was elected president that fall. During the Summer Olympic Games in Mexico City, a time of national pride, U.S. track athletes Tommy Smith and John Carlos, both African Americans, won the gold and bronze medals in the 200-meter race. During the award ceremony, both men bowed their head and raised their fist in silent demonstration against racial discrimination back home. The athletes were stripped of their medals and removed from the U.S. team. Not surprisingly, television, all three channels of it, ABC, NBC, CBS, all of that television. They brought all of these events intimately into our living rooms. It was kind of a social media of its day, from the war to the Olympics. The role of TV was not just passive, however. On 22 November, in an episode of Star Trek, the first televised interracial kiss startled network executives and viewers back in their TV rooms alike. The news show 60 Minutes and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and the comedy skit show Laugh-In all came into existence in that year, 1968. The incredible year of 1968 was all but past when on Christmas Eve, Apollo 8, with astronauts Jim Lovell, Bill Ayers, and Frank Borman, perhaps inspiring one of these gentlemen, I'll let him tell you which one, circled the moon for the very first time. They didn't put their feet on it, but they got there, thus beginning the first humans to see the far side of the moon's surface and viewing a tiny, vulnerable blue ball called Earth some 240,000 miles away. The three astronauts read from the first book of the Bible, Genesis, relaying the creation story, and it was broadcast around the earth back home that Christmas. Perhaps 1969 would be a new creation out of the turmoil of the earlier years of the 60s. Well, meanwhile, back in Lexington, Virginia, during the second semester of 1968, Superintendent Shell assembled the second class, the class of 1969, and informed them that 5 accomplished African Americans had applied to the Institute and had been accepted for admissions in August of that year as members of the class of 72. These young men had to prove that they were ready to accept the challenges as all entering rats are. And when they met that criteria, so they were accepted into the Corps, technically. Shell informed the rising first-classmen that the honor of the Institute rested with the successful assimilation of these new rats into the Corps. The responsibility for that process rested squarely with the first class, leading the underclasses. I can't imagine that happening on any other college campus. What board of visitors would allow such a thing to happen? It's what we expect. It's what we expect of these future leaders. Class President Frank Easterly and Regimental Commander Chris LaOrange determined not to disappoint the Institute or the 5 black men, soon to be new cadets. In that August, VMI became the last of the 4-year public colleges in Virginia to racially integrate. General Shell understood that integration at VMI must be in the truest definition of the word. Integration requires structural and cultural assimilation. Unlike other colleges which had accepted black students years earlier, VPI in 53, University of Virginia in 55, William and Mary in 66. There at VMI would be no restrictions to this idea of racial integration. While allowing black students to attend classes, those other colleges did not allow these students to eat in their dining facilities, or use their athletic facilities, or even live in a dorm on campus. From day one, an integrated VMI would mean cadets sharing all experiences equally. Now, if you'd like to know more about that whole process of desegregation in higher education in Virginia, I'll direct you to Peter Wallenstein's seminal work on that subject. You can find it, just Google it in the Encyclopedia of Virginia online, Desegregating in Virginia Higher Ed. It's worth your attention. Pioneers who had accepted such a challenge would have, by definition, have a certain possession of confidence and humor and intelligence to integrate into such a place as VMI. And those pioneers are these gentlemen. And it's their story that now we want to explore in their words. And we're so grateful to have you here for that opportunity. And let's do that. Now, the contestants in today's game have not received these questions in advance, so they will be as new to them as they are to me. I'd like to give the opportunity for you gentlemen to share something. I just sort of went through a very thumbnail sketch of 1968, but the very year that you haven't arrived at VMI yet, but you're living in that world. Share something of your views of the world in the 1960s, and where you thought the country was headed, what was going to be your place in it, whatever you would like to share about your pre-VMI.
Thanks for that introduction, Keith. First, great rundown about where the country was in 1968, but you missed probably the most momentous date in 1968, and that was 22 August 1968. For me, prior to that, growing up in segregated Virginia, going to segregated schools until I got to high school. The year 1964 seemed like a godsend when the Civil Rights Bill was signed, ending legal segregation. And it made the encouragement that I got from my parents and aunts and uncles and church members that you can do whatever you want to do, made that possible. And so that's where I was coming from. In terms of the events that were going on there in 1968, I was aware of the war and I was aware of the draft, but I had a dream that I wanted to become a pilot. And so that was what was motivating me, and I was, I thought, if there's a war, I want to take my place in it, but I would rather fly over it than be in the midst of it. So that was a big motivating factor for me to come to VMI, because it had Air Force ROTC, and not to belabor the point, but out of the 3 schools in Virginia that offered Air Force ROTC, VMI was the smallest and it was the cheapest. And that's where I was.
Good afternoon. Martin Luther King got killed in April of 1968. The 3 of us got on a bus from Newport News, Virginia, and rode down here one day to visit the school. Everybody was in white ducks. It was looking great. It was, I mean, really, boy, were we stupid, you know? But the point is, August 22nd, 1968 is a date sort of like December 7th. 1941. It's emblazons, yeah. It was a good decision. VMI is not perfect, and so we aren't either. And I liken my relationship with VMI is sort of like if you got a wife that smokes, you want her to stop smoking, okay? But you don't divorce her because she smokes. You think about it. Now, I've had several wives. but I think you get the gist of what I'm saying, you know.
The first comment I want to make is this is not unlike my whole life. I've been following this guy, and there's no way to do that. The second thing I want to mention, everyone, is I wish you could understand the pride that I have just being up here with these 3 other guys, 4 if Larry was here. Life is awfully short, but there are special bonds, and I'll just leave it at that. 1968, my father died in 63, so it was just me and my mom at home. Her and I were in the same class at Hampton High School, which was the second class to integrate that particular school. So we had our challenges there. I always wanted to go in the Marine Corps. I wanted to be a Marine tanker. Don't ask me why. I guess too many John Wayne movies. I applied to only 3 colleges, VMI, the Citadel in Norwich, with the intent of going to some military school, because Adam can attest to this, if you knew my mother, going to a military school was escape. And I don't mean that negatively. She had her standards. She prepared me for life, and God knows I am blessed because of her and my father. I just hope my kids appreciate what I and my wife had tried to do for them, because she made sacrifices for me. So 68, that's where I was coming from. I knew at the time that I applied. I didn't know that these other 4 guys were applying. I'm gonna show you how naive I was until we actually came up on the bus trip. I had forgotten about that. I didn't even realize that that BMI didn't have other black cadets. I mean, that never entered in my mind, because like I said, I was escaping from 1905 LaGuard Drive. So. It really didn't matter. I better stop there. Well, yeah. The thing about that time, you're right, there was a lot of things going on in the country, but our neighborhoods, and I know you all can relate to this, our neighborhoods were very close. One person's family was like another person's family. Adam was over my house. Matter of fact, my mother actually admired him and wished that I was more like him.
And my mother wished I was more like him, too.
So we both were playing a lie. So yeah, it's hard to explain. So I'll just stop.
First of all, I want to thank Colonel Gibson for giving the overview about how the country was in 1968. This was a background, as Harry has said, for growing up in basically segregated Virginia during that period of time, from being in primary school, going into a junior high situation into high school. Unlike these other 3 gentlemen sitting here from Hampton, I was from the good part of Taiwan, which was Newport News, and basically I grew up in what was called Lee Hall, so it is probably as far north of Newport News as you can get. But my parents saw this period of time as an opportunity to do better for the children. So they wanted the best for us. I entered Warwick High School in the 8th grade, and that was an 8th through 12 program then. So my first 2 years was in Warwick, and we integrated that school. There were 6 of us that attended then. That was when I really realized that we were doing something different when I went to junior high school. And that period of time was very traumatic. It was very not welcoming for the 6 of us, to say the least. Spring forward to the 10th grade, a new high school was built, opened, called Denby. And that school was almost a utopia at the time, because it brought kids from different backgrounds, walks of life, from all different high schools. So this school started off racially integrated. So the problems that I experienced at Warwick, we didn't experience them at Denby because of race. We experienced them primarily because of high school cliques, okay? You had your athletes, you had your smart kids, you had the kids that thought they were smart that weren't. So, hush. We had a fantastic track program, okay? And our band was state champions, okay? So football, maybe not so much, but we were working on it.
Just to give you a little bit of background, during that period of time, I wanted to be an engineer. And I looked all over at schools. Also wanted to have somewhat of a military career. My dad was career military. So I wanted to not necessarily follow in his footsteps, but at least do something that he would be proud of. So I applied to the Air Force Academy and Virginia Tech and a bunch of other schools. I played football in high school, so I got a couple of offers from some small schools for scholarship. But I said, well, I could go to VMI or some of the other schools and try to walk on as an athlete. So that's what I did when I came here. But I think the motivating factor is I wanted to go to engineering school. I wanted to stay in state if possible. My sister was a year behind me. So from a financial standpoint, I wanted to make it easy on the parents. But the times were one where I could see a future. I could see opportunities opening up, and coming here allowed me to pursue that dream. Like Phil and had mentioned, when I came up for my visit, I didn't come with them, I came with another group. I saw everybody in the white ducks, you know, it was springtime, you know, the sun was warm, the sky was bright, and everybody looked like they were happy, and I did not know. I didn't even know about rats. Okay. I did not know that I did not see another face around there in a uniform that looked like me. Only until I went into the admissions office and met with Colonel Lipscomb, sat across the desk from him. When he told me, he said, now you know that you'll be among the class with the first African Americans. He actually said first black cadets. And I like, really? So that was my introduction.
Dick, that's a perfect segue into something I'd like for all you guys to expand on, and that is expectation versus reality. VMI is an immersive experience, and no one can really predict what their reaction is going to be until you're doing it. So, two aspects here I'd like to have you guys tell us about. One, okay, you decide to go to this strange military school in the Shenandoah Valley. So what did your friends back home think about that? And once you arrived then, how did the reality of VMI match what you were anticipating?
Well, let me say this first of all, okay? The first part of that, how did my friends react? My friends looked at me like I had 4 heads, okay? They said, why in the world are you going there in these times? Military wasn't popular, except for the area that I grew up in. A lot of people were from military families. But it was not like a wave of patriotism sweeping over everyone where everybody wanted to go and sign up and volunteer to go to Vietnam. That was not the case at all. So they looked at me very strange because of that. But you know, I tried to explain to them it's more than military. You know, there are other things that are going on there.
And that's a perfect segue to what I tell people now, those who are listening, that I've been in some type of uniform since I was 7 years old. I was a Cub Scout, I was a Boy Scout, ended up going to military college, and then I spent 30 years, 3 days, and 13 hours in the Army. And not that I'm counting. As far as the reaction of my friends, my nickname, along with many, my nickname was Colonel. So it was no surprise to any of my friends that I was going to a military school. As a matter of fact, a lot of my friends really thought I was going to West Point. So either they knew me very well or thought I was crazy or whatever, but there was no surprise at all. No, definitely no surprise in my family. Matter of fact, everyone was very supportive.
Phil's not telling the truth about his nickname. His nickname, and I think most of you guys are of the age you'll recognize this, is Eddie Haskell. I'm sorry, the filter is off. I have a limited filter anyway. And as far as what my friends thought, hey, two of them were going with me. You know, I mean, so who cared what they thought? You know, and but no, we were encouraged by our communities, obviously, and it helped that Harry and Phil were in this with me. I would say this, Keith, when you have prospective cadets come to visit, don't let them come in the spring. Send them here after Christmas. I mean, that's a truer depiction of what they're going through in town.
Let's be honest, if they come here during the dark ages, no one will come. But as far as reaction, as Lawrence and Phil said, you know, we were the three buddies and called ourselves the Three Musketeers at times. So that's all that mattered to me in terms of friends. I can recall, it just so happened I was the first to be accepted. I was accepted early. And shortly after I was accepted, there was a newspaper article that said that VMI had accepted its first black cadet. And I can remember saying, holy cow. Or something to that effect. That's me. And so I said, hey, you guys got to come with me now. But at any rate, I can recall very vividly that my high school guidance counselor was very incredulous. Said, how in the world did you get into VMI? And that's, you know, that was just, you know.
See your SAT scores? She obviously did.
Yeah, but I mean, the expectations of the whites around me were, you know, she was thinking I was shooting way above what her expectations for me were. In terms of my church community and my neighborhood, my neighbors didn't really seem to, well, the kids knew and cared, and they thought that was great. Some of the parents were saying, okay, see, he can do it, you do it too. But very, very much a lot of encouragement from my church members. Yeah, in terms of most of my other peers, as Dick said, people were wondering, why in the world do you want to go to a military school now? And you know, as I mentioned, the opportunity for the education, Air Force ROTC, outweighed anything else related that was going on there. Knew nothing at all except from hearing about it, about the rat line. And that was a good thing. So, it's a bad thing that I didn't know about the bonds that the rat line produces and all of the good things I would get here from my brother rats. It's a bad thing that prospective cadets can't understand that until they actually live it.
Yeah. I think one of the things that Colonel Gibson also asked was about expectations. And I'm thinking back to, you know, leading up to 22nd August 1968, about what my expectations were going to be. I was happy to be going to college, first of all. I was happy to be embarking on that journey. I was naive to know what I was really getting into. As far as I was naive. And that naivety kind of got dispelled on 23 August. Where things were coming at me so fast, so quick, from many different directions, in order to do, in order to follow, in order to get in ship shape. I didn't have time to be thinking about a whole lot else other than surviving the day.
One other thing I wanted to add about expectations. I don't think I was the only one of us that was wondering what it would be like to actually live with a white person. That was something that I wondered about up until the time I got here. I said, what's it really going to be like? Because I had gone to school with white guys, but that was about it. And I wondered, what is it going to be like? And as it turns out, the bonds that I formed with my roommates, talking after taps in the haze, they're inseparable bonds. My brother Tom Hathaway wanted to be here, but he can't. His wife had recent surgery, but we're brothers from a different mother, is how he puts it. And I know, Phil, you have close bonds with your roommates, and same with you, Dick. It's amazing how close the bonds are. But the expectation before we got here, I had no idea. I was really worried about that.
I did not address expectations before you heard about the escape, but that wasn't my major. I want everyone to understand, I think, that in any life it's important to have two things, a goal and a dream. Now, it's fantastic when the two are the same or similar, but remember, a dream you don't always necessarily reach, but a goal you work and strive for. Expectations is what I want to address, and remember I said I had been in uniform. Well, I thought my destiny was to be in the military. I was going to do whatever I had to do. I was going to sacrifice whatever I had to sacrifice. I was going to put forth the effort to get my goal, and my goal is to get into the Marine Corps, which, by the way, I did not achieve. You heard me mention the Army. So when things didn't necessarily go my way, not only here at BMI or throughout life, you always keep your dream and your goal in front of you.
Could you, gentlemen, take a moment and tell us more about this, the experience that you had? So you arrived at BMI, you had like roommates, you were dispersed amongst the Corps, going to different companies, I assume. Were the companies you assigned to the same as all cadets? And did you ever feel that through this experience, maybe particularly during your RAP year before those bonds with Brother Raps are solidified, did you feel that things for you were different from these other guys, or did you have those moments?
I have to tell, I hate to call the story a vignette, but when you said that, something popped in my mind, and as Adam said, our filters are less now, and my memory is horrible, so I better say what I'm thinking about it. Okay. When you arrive, at least here as a rat, they used to size you into companies. I don't think you still do that or not. But I can't say enough about the organization between the administration and the first class, class 69, which I give homage to for letting us be a part of their reunion. But Adam and I are basically the same height. So when they were doing the sizing process, Dick went to A, Harry had a special skill, as he always does, went to band. size into E. And they said, no. So they did what a proper military organization would do. Randolph ends in R, Wilson ends in W. They moved me to F Company. I was one of the smallest, well, not smallest, but I wasn't a small guy, but I was one of the shortest guys in F Company. Now, the reason I told you all that background is because Harry hit on a key point. A lot of things happen in life you have no control over at all, none. I'm not going to try to preach to you, even though if you give me a chance I would. But there's things that happen in your life you can't give any other explanation to. But that move for me to F Company put me in a room with a guy named Gail Summers. And I tell you, we were roommates for all 4 years here. There was a reason I was moved. There was a reason I was placed in that room with him. And he and I talk about it all the time. You form some relationships that you can't explain. He's from Indiana. He's tall, he has blonde hair, so ain't nowhere in the world we related, but we related.
You have no hair.
I have no hair. I know that was a long way to get around to the point. The point is you form relationships here that I can't explain them to you. I wouldn't, until you go through it, until you experience it. It's just like the bond that we have here. I can't explain to it. The last time my children were talking about these other guys, tears actually came to my eyes, and I can't tell you why. It just, they're special people.
Now, in as far as we had dinner with Keith last night, and he talked about when women were admitted, first day of women, matriculated to VMI, satellite trucks, news media, extensive coverage. And I juxtaposed that against when we showed up. We were 4 children going to college for the first time. So after we got over the shock of August 22nd, Jamie Totten was my company commander. Jamie, you're in here? Okay, yeah. Sports fans, you know who Vince Lombardi is, okay? He treated all his players like dogs, equally, but equally badly. Jamie, I'm not saying that about you, but... Okay, all right, okay, we're good with that. But the point I'm trying to make, the bigger issue is the second class, the rising first class, was well prepared and documented that they were going to make this thing successful. Now, we were just poor, dumb kids, from Virginia. We were going to college. So there was a lot of work in the background and a lot of work that we were oblivious to. But we do appreciate it because things went very smoothly. Like I said, didn't like it, couldn't stand it. It was awful, but everybody felt the same way.
We should have put 5-second delays on these microphones. I apologize.
I want to give a shout out to Class 69 too, because I tell you, they deserve a round of applause. I had no idea at the time of the preparation and the commitment and the responsibility that was thrust upon that class during these times. And they accepted that challenge. They made it, I'm not sure what the word I'm looking, they made it a non-event for us as far as knowing what was going on behind the scenes. To know that some of us had roommates that had dikes and classes already picked out ahead of time that we didn't know anything about. And I found that out in later years because my first dyke, who came up to tell me that he was my dyke the old-fashioned way, was later told that he couldn't have me as a dyke because somebody else was going to be my dyke. And that individual I saw earlier today, and I remember there he is reflecting the story that he came up to me some years ago and said, "Hey, you don't know me, but I was your first dyke." I'm like, "What do you mean my first dyke?" And he tells him this story about how he came up, picked me, and I was going to be his dyke, and then was later told by some members of the class that no, so-and-so is going to be his dyke. So, but as far as taking on that responsibility, making sure that we were treated like other cadets was monumental. And again, I thank you for that.
Even yet today, cadets find certain support groups. Churches will have adopted cadet programs, so the cadets can kind of get into a home environment. The athletic programs have foster parenting kind of thing in the local community. And this is actually a question from the audience about the way the traditional African American community here in Lexington interacted with you guys. Do you have a moment to comment on that?
Let me kick it off, okay, because I know everybody has something to say about this. But yeah, I got a wife out of it, so. To be serious for a moment, the African American community here in Lexington was phenomenal for my success, and for giving me a piece of reference to know that, there are people here who are supporting me, that's got my back, that's looking out for me, even though, it's almost like we have the community on one side of the walls, but what people didn't realize is that we have people on the inside too, okay? We have people who worked in the tailor shop, people who worked in the barber shop, the laundry room. People will come up to you and whisper little things like, "Hey, I got you. I need you to come over here. Let me know if anything is going on." So, I mean, it wasn't the Underground Railroad, but the community didn't start outside here. It was people who worked here as well as those who wanted to see our success, wanted to see us do well, and supported that, from having Sunday lunches, Sunday dinners prepared for us at many different houses. There got to be somewhat of a competition for a while, who was going to have the black cadets over, okay? And a lot of them had daughters, so some of the choices were made based on not necessarily the food. But I won't go into any more of that. But the community was phenomenal, and still is, and I owe a debt of gratitude to them. And over the years, I have made sure, because like I said, they gave me my wife. I made sure that I stayed in touch with a lot of folks here.
Yes, the local black community is very supportive. We had mandatory church back in those days, and I can't remember how many weeks it was as rats. It was mandatory that you go to JM Hall, and then after a certain amount of time, you were allowed to go to church off post. And I can't remember who of you went along with me that first time that that we went to First Baptist Church, right down right down at the end of the hill, and Reverend Trotman, Johnny Trotman was the pastor there at the time, and that very first time we got a lot of encouraging words from the congregation. Reverend Trotman invited us to his house right after the service for lunch and or dinner or whatever it was. And that was the first of many Sunday dinners. And we went to not only to his house, but to other houses in the local community. They adopted us. And it was good to have that support. And as Dick said, you know, having people that were on the VMI staff, you know, whispering, hey, everything going okay? You all right? You need anything? You know, and you know that helped. You know, I can still remember watching the Super Bowl at Reverend Troutman's house. You know, just things. You know, when our parents would come up for Parents Weekend, they would stay with local families, and instead of having to go to hotels and motels. So it was a very good bond, and it made it easier.
Just to tag on with that, and I know I speak to a lot in this room, VMI can be a very lonely place, very lonely. So the importance of having a support group or support groups is immeasurable. You can't put a price on it. The community was one, and Harry kind of alluded to this point. The Baker family was one of the families at the church. They formed a relationship not only with me, but with my parents, or my mother specifically. And that relationship lasted, long after I left BMI. Mrs. Baker treated me like a member of the family. Even when I went into the service, I used to get care packages overseas from Mrs. Baker. And again, like I said, I can go off on a tangent about relationships, but I won't do that. It is important for you to understand that even though VMI can be a very lonely place, I personally never really felt actually alone. There were times I wished I was somewhere else, but I was never alone here.
Sure, yes. Yeah, thanks. With some trepidation, I ask one final question, as sort of a wrap-up. Half a century, it's been 50 years, and when you look back on your life and the things you've accomplished and the challenges, the VMI years, so, would you do it again? Would you?
Well, since I have no filter, I guess. Probably not. Did you expect different? Really. VMI is not for everybody, but everybody can get something out of VMI. That's how I like to leave it that way. It's not a traditional environment. Like I said, you don't divorce your wife because she smokes. You get her some Nicorette, you try to hide her cigarettes, throw your ashtrays away, but you don't divorce her. And I'm gonna leave it at there. I have to leave it at that. There are things that I find very distasteful about the environment, and I always have. However, if you look beneath the exterior, there's some quality values here that you don't find anyplace else. And you got to keep that in mind. Age gives you the ability to balance things. When you're young, you see what's happening right now. You can't look at 10, 20 years from now. And that's what I encourage everybody to do. But no, to answer your initial question, Keith, probably not.
And see, that's a perfect segue, because my answer would be yes. but I will tell you, there's an advantage of being naive, being young, and some of the other words that I can't think of right now. Again, you always, in life, you gotta weigh positives and negatives. And clearly, for me, now I can't speak for anybody else but Philip Wilkerson, for me, there's more positives than negative. And you ain't gotta be a rocket scientist to figure out that legislate is pretty good. I'm gonna go with that. Now, were there some things that I would change? Probably. But I can't emphasize enough the relationships, the lasting, long relationships that I don't know, because I haven't been anywhere else, but I don't think I could have formed them anywhere else than here.
For many years, I said, BMI is a great place to be from. I'm glad I went there, but I wouldn't do it again. But as I've gotten older, and I guess some of the specific memories have faded, and I reflect upon the relationships, as Phil alluded to, my roommates, my other brother rats, relationships with my professors, and I think about what did I get out of VMI that I couldn't have gotten anywhere else. It's nothing like folding your Dykes laundry on Saturday night, thinking about your buddies partying away in college, and saying, hey, why am I doing this? Said, yeah, I'm building character, but what the character I built was self-discipline. I don't think I would have gotten that at any other college to the degree that I got here at VMI. And, knowing what I know about myself, what I know about my brother rats, yes, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I wouldn't like it. But I do it again. I hated VMI for 3 years and 3 3/4 years. It wasn't until after spring break, my first class year, that I really started liking VMI.
I think that, and I've said this many times before, I think that the 5 of us showing up here at the same time under the circumstances that we did, it wasn't any grand design. We were chosen by circumstances that took place at that point in time. But having been here and having opted to stay, having opted to go through this, there's not a day that passes where my VMI experiences or my VMI education hasn't been called to the forefront, or even in the decision that I make or how I interact with other people. A lot of that is driven by me being here. And I am happy to be able to say that I don't have any problems making decisions. I don't have any problem understanding that I'm responsible for things. I have no problem with being accountable for my actions, because all of that I learned by being here and interacting with other people who were here at the same time. From a relationship standpoint, not only my brother rats, but the VMI community as a whole. If I need help, or if I need somebody to do something with me, I know who I can call on. I can pick up the phone, I can send a text, I can send an email to somebody who's had the same experience that I've had here, and I know I can count on them to either tell me the truth about what I'm asking, or be there beside me to help me carry out this thing. And I don't think you're gonna find that anywhere else. Now, the question of would I do it again? And that's not an easy one to answer, because as everyone has said, you know, there are a lot of pros, there's cons. There are times when I'm sitting down late at night in the engineering laboratory doing my homework, okay, because it's the only place where I could get away to really concentrate, and there's nobody there to help me. I mean, I think about that, and I'm like, wouldn't it be better if I was somewhere else where I could go to a group setting anytime and sit around a coffee shop and have it, you know? I think about that, and I said, I don't know. So the answer to that question is, what are my other choices?
This has been one of the fastest hours that I can remember spending here, and we could actually go further. But I appreciate and admire and thank you for giving us the opportunity to kind of reflect on that moment in BMI and American history, and to the class of '69 for having you guys join me. These proceedings are closed. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Good to see you. Have you been? Oh. But I am so